Hey everybody, it is Sunday afternoon and I am going to do a really impromptu trip around the world here. It's been a while since I've done one, and I know I got my live stream coming up tonight, but I do want to get this round the world update shot. And today we're actually going to do something a little bit different. We are going to start by having a look at my experimental tank in the other room. So I normally don't cut these videos. I like to do them all in one shot, but we're going to have to go in the other room, so sit tight. We're going to go check that tank out, and then we'll be right back here. Alright, not a whole lot to talk about in here. Again, this is just going to be an experimental tank. We're just trying to find out whether or not having that very deep sand bed like that will allow for denitrification, and if it does, we will go from there and see what happens. But that'll probably take until, I don't know, probably springtime before we can really decide whether that's the case or not, because it takes months and months for that denitrifying bacteria to establish, if it ever does. So you can see I've still got the 4 golden zebra loaches in there. They still look fantastic. They're doing well. They're actually growing and putting on a little bit of size, and that's important because that's what I'm trying to do, is grow them out so that I can put them in my gourami tank without being eaten by my striped Raphael catfish. So the only other thing to really talk about in this tank is the fact that it was just covered in diatom algae. Like, everything in there was brown. The glass was brown, the rocks were brown, the gravel was brown. Everything was covered in the diatom algae. And I just let it sit. I didn't really do anything to it. I just kind of let the tank do its thing. I let it sort of fall over, and eventually everything just sort of cleared up, and in a matter of a few days it was almost just, I don't know, the whole tank just went through this huge transformation. I went through a little period of cloudy water, and then the cloudiness cleared up, and then the diatoms just went away. I swear I've not wiped down the glass. I've not done anything to this tank, and it went from being completely brown to looking like that. It's just beautiful and crystal clear. Everything sparkles in there now. So still not getting anything approaching denitrification or anything like that, but we sure have a good looking tank now. And again, I did nothing to it, so make what you want of that. But that's about the only thing we got as an update on this tank. So let's head on back over to the waterfall and we'll resume as usual. Okay, now that we're back over here, we can pick up where we left off. The waterfall is still doing great. It's bone dry in the back. I don't have anything that's even suggesting that there might be a leak anywhere. Again, if you did not catch the other video where I was talking about having a leak after I first got it started up again, it was not actually a leak. It was simply water and splashes and stuff that was running down through a little channel here, and it was actually dripping on the outside of the tank, and that was giving what appeared to be a leak. I was getting some water collecting in the back there, but it was not coming through the lining. It was dripping around it. It was going outside the lining and dripping on the outside of the tank. So I simply put a little piece of plastic in there. It sticks out far enough that any water dripping on it gets caught, and it actually just drips it right back into the tank now. So that was my very simple solution. It's not glued in there or anything. It's just a little piece of plastic stuck in there, and I've not had a single leak or drop of water behind the tank ever since. So that's doing really well, and I'm happy about that. I'm thinking about taking a spray bottle. You can see how the water has turned, like everywhere where that rubbery coating gets wet turns brown, but where it stays dry is black and shiny. So I'm thinking about just getting some a spray bottle and misting that down with water and seeing if I can't get it to turn brown all the way over. If not, it is just latex rubber. I could probably paint it with something or whatever, I don't know, but that black there kind of annoys me. That's something that, now that we know it's going to work and everything's up and running, I'd like to do away with all that black coloration. Otherwise, everything is going really well. You can see I've got some new growth coming out on my water sprite up here. Don't really know whether you can count that as new growth on the tip of this temple plant, but I got a big piece of temple plant lying in here. The roots are all the way down on this end. My Java fern's looking really good in here. I'm sorry, my Nubius. The Java fern is actually doing really well. You're seeing I'm getting some of this stuff. It actually turned upwards, which is good. but it's also dying off because it, you know, was in water and now it's exposed to the air. So those original fronds that were used to being underwater and are now exposed to air, some of those may die off, but I will get new ones very clearly starting to grow in, and eventually that's just going to be thick Java fern growing right in there, so I'm happy about that. The creeping Jenny that I pilfered from the backyard, you can see all the new growth coming up on that. The dead nettles that I planted in there along with that creeping Jenny. This is in a planter, by the way. That's not just laying there. That's in about a 4-inch tall little square. Just one of the disposable kind you get when you purchase plants from a garden center. I always save them because they work great for this kind of stuff. My dead nettles there is doing well. You can see, if you haven't noticed already, I put my arrowhead plant up there. I put a pot full of dead nettles over here. So all that's doing well. The tank itself is still just ticking over. I did get a little bit of cloudiness and a little bit of funky looking water for a couple of days after I turned it back on and got everything up and running, but you can see that has since cleared up and gone away and everything looks great now, so I'm not worried about that at all. As far as the fish in the tank, not really a whole lot to talk about. I haven't lost any, haven't added any. My angelfish is still kind of reluctant to come out and hides in the back in the shadows most of the time, which is a shame because it's a beautiful angelfish, and it's like, it's probably pushing 8 years old now, so I don't know why it has not gotten used to coming out and about. Oh, I can see it now. It's back in this corner over here. We'll never be able to see it on camera, but trust me, it's back there. So everything's looking good in the tank. I'm not unhappy about anything that's going on in here. And since we're down here, we can have a look into my little foot tank. You can see my cherry barb is still swimming around in there. That cherry barb has been in here for years and years. And you can also see the front of my intake pump there. I don't actually have a filter on that. That's just growth and snail shells and crud and everything else. And it takes it from a fairly fast-flowing waterfall and it turns it into this little trickle. But as long as the water's still moving, I don't care. I just let this tank sit here and tick over, and I never have any issues with it. I am looking now to see if I can see any ghost shrimp in there. Again, we can see that that cherry barb is still in there doing well. Right here, if you haven't been able to pick out where that cherry barb was. I am not seeing any ghost shrimp at a glance, but I'm also not really going to get in there and dig around through the mulm and all that kind of stuff while we're in the middle of shooting this video. So I'm going to say that we've probably finally run the course of the ghost shrimp in that tank. It took quite a long time. I'm not going to say there's no ghost shrimp in there anymore, but there's none that are apparent in there anymore, so I'll look into that, maybe see if we can find some. So that's about all that's going on with my waterfall tank. Let's get some of these lights turned out so we can reduce a bit of the glare on some of the other tanks. I guess we can go ahead and leave that light on for the little fishies so they don't think the end of the world is nigh upon us. So moving on to my 29 miscellaneous. Actually, let's turn that light out whether the fish think the world is coming to an end or not, because that's a lot of glare. They'll get over it. 29 miscellaneous. Not a lot going on in here, but I did talk the other day in one of my live streams about the Java fern that's in this tank and how it's growing attached to the rocks. And now that we've got a camera right in front of it, we can come down here a little more clearly. You can see how the main rhizome has just sort of grown across the surface of the rock, and it's laying its roots down and attaching the roots as it goes. So that is a very, very long time of not doing anything at all, and you can see how it even follows the contour of the rock and just grows around it. And so that is literally years of just leaving that alone and letting it do its thing. Occasionally I will have to get in there and separate some of it out, or I will have to cut some of the taller fronds off. But this is one of those tanks that doesn't have a lot of light in it, and therefore I don't really grow plants fast in this tank. They grow lush enough, and we're getting to the point where we might need to get in there and do a little bit of plant maintenance on this tank. My Anubias over here is getting fairly big. I have had to cut that back once in the last probably year and a half, and it's probably now getting about close to having to do it again. And at one point I did have to remove some of the Java that was growing on that piece of wood right there, because you couldn't even see the piece of wood anymore. And yes, that is a bent aquarium net. The net itself got torn out, and so I just bent the square end of it at 90 degrees, and then I bent the handle so it basically makes a hook at the top. And you can kind of think about it like a ladle. It just goes down the back wall, and then it bends 90 degrees, and then you've got that sort of flat space that I just balanced that piece of wood on. I may have tied it to it with something, but that's been so many years ago now that I doubt it's actually still tied to it anymore. It's probably just sitting there on top of it at this point. But that is a piece of wood with some Java fern growing on it, and I have had to get in there and actually thin that Java fern out. But it is once in a blue moon that I need to get in here and deal with the plants in this tank. And again, I think it's because I just have the low lighting. When we come to a tank like this, my 55-gallon gourami tank, I've got a lot of lighting. And it is a 4-foot shop light on the top of the tank. I have these 4-foot shop lights of varying makes and brightnesses and intensities, but at the end of the day, they're all still shop lights. There's still a lot of light coming out of them. And these tanks tend to grow plants much more vigorously than that tank with the sort of standard aquarium hood type lighting. Just not enough light to really grow plants terribly vigorously. So in this tank, I'm growing plants a little too vigorously. I really need to get in here and trim this water sprite down. I've already trimmed it back once since I put it in there, but you can see how amazing it's doing. All that new growth, I mean, it's just so lush and vigorous growing in there. It looks awesome. This algae that keeps growing on the glass, I don't know what kind of algae it is, but it is tough as nails. I use the melamine sponges or the magic erasers, if you want to go by the brand name, and I got to put elbow grease in there to try to get that glass clean, and it only stays clean for a day or two because I'm not really genuinely removing the stuff. I'm just getting it to where it looks clear, you know, it looks decent, but if you rub your fingers across it, you can actually still feel some texture on the glass. So getting that last little bit of algae off of that glass so it really, you know, takes a while for it to come back is difficult. I don't know what kind of algae that is, but it's really, really difficult to get off the glass in this tank. So the tank itself is doing fine, you know, all the fish in there, everything's doing fine, nothing to really talk about. You can see for yourself how beautiful the gouramis are. Those pearl gouramis in there are coloring up nicely. A little disappointed with the new light I put on here. I just put on a really, really cheap shop light. It was literally a $14 shop light that I got from Walmart. And the color rendering and all that's just not the best quality. It doesn't look bad, but it doesn't look great either. But, I mean, for $14, it looks fantastic if you want to look at it in those terms. But just from sheer actual aesthetic value, I could go with some better color rendering, and we'd see a lot more vibrant colors coming out on these pearl gouramis in particular. Again, I know that looks beautiful, but imagine how beautiful that would look under really good high-quality lighting instead of this crappy little $14 shop light. So, anyway, that's where we stand on this tank. Not a lot going on with it. We do need to get in there and just do some basic, you know, trimming the plants and wiping the glass down kind of stuff. But otherwise, everything's good to go on the gourami tank. So, moving on to the 55. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this tank. Basically because nothing has really changed in it. The last time I shot any video talking about this tank, I was a little concerned about my South American bumblebee catfish. It was sort of out and about during the day, a little bit, excuse me, a little bit of unusual behavior. Its head looked a little like pale, maybe something going on there. I've seen it several times since then, and it looks fine. It's behaving perfectly normal. I've checked the water parameters, at least for all the stuff that I can check, and I don't know what to make of it other than I'm not going to worry about it because everything seems to be pretty much normal. So this tank, as usual, is in need of maintenance. I got to get in there and do a little something on it, but not much going on in there. Got my diamond tetras, got my angelfish, I got the catfish on the bottom. Got a couple of lazy old Siamese algae eaters. You can see one right there. You can see another one right there. And there really is truth to the saying that these fish tend to eat a lot less algae as they mature. If you want a Siamese algae eater that's really going to chow through the algae, you want to get a younger one. But again, I say this I think it has less to do with their diet changing. I don't think they need more meaty food as they get older. Like you'll hear a lot of people say that as these algae eaters get older, they need a meatier diet. I don't believe that to be true. I just think they need less of a diet as they get older. I've said this before. Think about how much food a teenager needs versus how much food an old man needs. You know, and these fish are basically the fish equivalent of old men. They just don't need to be in there grazing on algae all day anymore. They literally do this. They lie in the bushes and just... Again, it's literally the equivalent of sitting in the rocking chair looking out the window at this point in their lives. And... they're just not really devouring the algae in this tank anymore. Although I gotta say, this tank doesn't have a ton of algae to begin with. It's got more cyanobacteria issues than algae issues. So, whatever. I don't know. We're going to do something with this tank one of these days. I know I've been saying that for a long time, but I will get around to it. I did just actually remove a big chunk of Anubias over here. You can see this big new chunk growing up here. There was another one in the back that was growing up that was even bigger, and I just removed that and cut that out of my tank for one of my regular viewers who's bought plants from me quite a few times in the past. So he got that. He has it in one of his tanks, and he has some of his algae eating fish working on it, getting it nice and cleaned up, and soon it will be going into one of his tanks as well. So moving on to my 40 breeder. Let me get my little step stool out of the way here so I don't trip over that and kill myself. Really, seriously, nothing to talk about in this tank. In my last live stream, I started to discuss the possibility that a Siamese algae eater might be a good alternative for getting rid of blackbeard algae, and then I remembered this tank. And if you look around in this tank, you can see between the red cyanobacteria and the blackbeard algae, this tank looks horrible. It really does. It's starting to look terrible. And the red cyanobacteria is new. That was not really in here a couple of weeks ago. So I'm kind of wondering what's going on in this tank, especially if we look down right here. You see how red that is? That used to just be blackbeard algae. It just looked brown and fuzzy. And now it's got this red sheet growing over it. And that is definitely red cyanobacteria. So this is going to be a project tank, and I just keep putting it off and putting it off. You know how it is. Once something gets to be such a project that, you know, I'll get to it one of these days. The water's fine. The fish are fine. Nobody's in any danger. You know, it just looks gross. You know, it just looks terrible. So we'll get in there again. I know I've been saying it forever, so I'm going to say it again. We'll get in there at some point. So again, make sure you're subscribed, and then you won't miss that whenever I do finally get around to it. Moving on to my 125-gallon New World tank. Not a whole lot going on in here either. I've not been too busy in the fish room this week. The only thing to really talk about in this tank is my bluegill sunfish, which is really starting to come into its own. Its colors are not what I would call vibrant, but it is more colorful than any sunfish I've ever kept before, so I think keeping it in the larger tank is helping, and keeping it without a lot of other competition from similar type fish, you know, other sunfish in the tank, is helping out to some degree too. If you're wondering why bits of leaf drift by like that, it's because I have a tank full of silver dollars, and silver dollars destroy plants. That's why my Java fern looks like that. And that's why my water sprite looks like that, if you want to even call that water sprite anymore. You know, about the only thing that really does live in this tank and survive is this Anubias, and that is because it's tough as linoleum, and the silver dollars don't really fancy munching on that Anubias. That's about the only plant I can actually really grow in this tank. But the sunfish is starting to get aggressive. It's starting to kind of keep everybody else at bay. You can kind of see how he's sort of sitting out in the tank in the middle all by himself. Let's see what happens. Oh, that's exactly what happens. Every time other fish come near it, he doesn't necessarily get really aggressive, but he definitely also lets them know that he's the king of this tank. And there, that gives you a little bit of a look at some of the blue. You can see where they get the name bluegill. They got a little bit of blue tracery in their fins. They're really beautiful fish, and if you actually see them out in the wild and you see them on a bright sunny day in the natural sunlight, they're really, really gorgeous fish. But that's the only real issue going on in this tank right now, is the little minor drama of that sunfish is kind of coming into its own and making his presence known in the tank. Otherwise, everything is still ticking over. We do still need to get in here. I told you before about how this power head is disconnected from the glass, and it's basically just blowing straight down at this point. And this air stone, once it gets down to depth, it really struggles to put the air out anymore, just by the sheer water pressure is overcoming the pump pressure. So I have to assume that means, you see how much air is coming out of it up here? I have to assume that that means this air stone is probably getting clogged up, and it's restricting, I guess I should probably stop doing this and freaking the fish out. But it's restricting the amount of air bubbles that are coming out of there. Once it gets down into the depth, and the pressure on the, the water pressure starts pushing back on it. So need to get in here and do a little bit of work to this end of the tank, but it's still all functioning properly. It just, isn't functioning exactly the way I want it to. It's still, but we are still getting water circulation, and we are still getting air bubbles and all that kind of stuff. And I hinted at my last live stream I would one day give a peek behind the curtain back here. So now if anybody's ever wondered what is behind that black curtain, that's where all the magic happens, where all my weight loss has been happening. We got my treadmill and elliptical and all that stuff is back there behind the curtain. So coming over here, wow, the fish just jumped and splashed water all on my face. I'm hoping it didn't get on the camera there. Snail tank, nothing really to talk about in the snail tank. We are eventually, whenever I get around to shooting the video about mulm, we are going to be looking at the mulm that's in this tank. We can see what my natural filter is doing. I told you that Java fern or Java moss gets on stuff and it just starts growing everywhere. And I did rip a bunch of Java moss out of here about a week ago to put in the Waterfall tank. So that's why there's so little Java fern in there right now. So moving on to my native tank. This is a 40 breeder. I don't know, I've just kind of lost interest in this tank. I'm not really sure how to explain it. I think it looks gorgeous in one sense, but it doesn't really do much in the other. I swear I clean this filter out every day, and every day it looks like that again. This thing clogs up, and there's no filter on it. It's just the open-ended pump. Just the screen on the end of the pump gets so dirty so quickly, it reduces the water flow to that. And then all of this is that long hair algae. You can see my water sprite in this tank. This is all water sprite here. It's growing like mad. I got so much duckweed growing in there. That's more water sprite, and you can see some of that beautiful orange coloration. Not really sure why I get that sometimes when I get the emergent growth on the water sprite, but if it's been emergent for a while, the water sprite will grow this almost like a pine needle sort of look to it. When it first grows emergent, though, it has more of that broad leaf look that you typically see with the water sprite when it's underwater. And then sometimes I will get this lovely sort of orange coloration on it. Look at these. I don't know why I always do this when I'm in the middle of shooting a video. Now I'm going to have duckweed on my hands for the rest of this video. I got so much duckweed in this tank. That is terrestrial fern of some sort. That's too dense and tough to be Java moss. So that's some kind of, I said fern, I'm sorry, moss. That's some kind of terrestrial moss. I'm not sure of the species. I'm not really good at moss. It's probably sphagnum. That is some kind of terrestrial moss as well, and so is that. And that all came sort of attached to the piece of wood when I collected it up. This, of course, needs some water on it. It's getting a little dried out. This used to flow enough that this all stayed wet, but it just, again, within days, that is just clogged up. Fish-wise, we've still got the redwag molly or platies that I threw in there. We've got a bunch of gambusia that are still in there. And again, theoretically, as of a few days ago, we have at least one crayfish that is still in here. But the tank is filthy and dirty, and I really need to get in there and get it cleaned up. You can see roots down flowing around in there from the water sprite. You can see the water sprite up here, and again, I'm getting some of that really pretty orange coloration developing on that water sprite. And now its roots are trailing down into the water. So I'm going to leave it alone. I mean, it looks pretty and everything, but again, I don't know why. It's just sort of hard to explain. As interesting as this tank has the potential to be, it's just not really holding my interest. So moving along, I'm going to look at my 125 now, but we need to step back here to get the whole thing in view. So this tank will be getting its own feature video here in the very near future, so we're not going to spend too much time talking about it. I want to try to keep this video under half an hour if I can, and we're already pushing that. So fish-wise, everything in here is fine. My Synodontis uterus, the new Synodontis catfish that I put in this tank not too long ago, is still in there. We saw that last week in the live stream. He was out and about. He was tussling with one of my plecos. I have chocolate zebra plecos in this tank, and the catfish was sort of tussling with one of the plecos. Although pleco, of course, is a catfish, but you get the idea. Much larger than I thought. I was really surprised at how big that catfish had gotten, the Synodontis catfish had gotten. And so it is still alive, it is still doing well, but it is still not coming out and about. I still do get a little bit of aggression from my shark towards the Siamese algae eaters that are in this tank. Here's one of them right there, and the other one probably will not be too far away. They usually hang out pretty close to each other. But one thing I need to do in this tank is get in here and thin out some of my red tiger lotus. You can see it's getting pretty thick. I've got pads across the surface. I got pads all the way down there. So definitely got to get in there and start doing something with the red tiger lotus. The main thing I want to talk about in this tank, though, is the green cyanobacteria. You can see how it grows in sheets across the surface there. And then I've got some really bad areas down here where it's growing. It grows on that Anubias down there. It grows really thick on that Anubias. And so what I'm finding is, as I've been procrastinating getting in there, I've done a few treatments and I've done some manual removal, but I haven't really aggressively gone after the cyanobacteria in this tank yet. And I find that the more I tend to leave it alone, the more it seems to be receding. So I think what we're going to do with this is I'm going to continue addressing it gently. I'm going to physically remove some during water changes if I can just gently vac it out of there without disturbing it too badly. But I'm not going to get in there and be really aggressive with the cyanobacteria this time. I'm not going to be blasting it with treatments. And we're going to see if it doesn't have a different effect. Well, I don't know how well you can see or not. But if you look back in there, not that sort of yellowy looking stuff, but there's sheets. You can kind of make it out. There's the sheets of the dark green stuff growing on the Java fern in the back area. And again, remember, I got a shop light. I got a 4-foot shop light down the middle, and then I got a floodlight in, you know, they're just the cheap little reflective dome lights that you can buy, but that is an outdoor floodlight in there. And likewise, I've got a floodlight on that end. So I got 2 floodlights and a 4-foot shop light lighting that tank up. When I bought this tank, it came with 2 3-foot fluorescent fixtures on it, and each 3-foot fixture had a 24-inch fluorescent tube in it. So this tank was literally lit with 2 24-inch fluorescent tubes, was what they considered a good amount of light for a 125-gallon tank. I've got a shop light and 2 floodlights on it, so big difference in the amount of light that I put on my tanks versus what the industry seems to think is a normal amount of light to put on one of your aquariums. So moving on to my deep sand bed tank that I've got in here. We're still not getting any kind of denitrification or anything like that. The tank is still ticking over well enough. Everything is doing fine. I do get a lot of algal growth, again, because of hanging a floodlight directly over top of the tank. It's a lot of light in there, and when you've got a lot of light and you let your nutrients develop and all that sort of thing, you wind up with algae. Now, it doesn't bother me, but it is a lot of algae in this tank, and so this tank might be due for some sort of like a chemi-clean treatment or something like that, some sort of biological treatment, just to get in there and clean that up. But whatever, you know, that's just, it's an option. It's not something I'm considering. It's not something I'm particularly worried about. But that is an option if it gets a little too grungy and that biological growth in there gets just to be a little too much for the tank. What I really need to do is get like a rubber lip or something and put like a good algae eating fish in this tank, or maybe put some more snails or something in there. But you can also see I definitely do get that green sheeting cyanobacteria that grows across the bottom. It almost looks like a green carpet, but that is, you know, that's the cyanobacteria growing in the gravel. That is a combination of cyanobacteria and other stuff. I'm having interesting stuff develop on this gravel. It's been kind of interesting watching this tank just sort of develop. So we will be continuing to watch it. But as far as the fish in there, everybody's doing fine. I got the red wag platies. I got a few guppies. I have about 15 of the ember tetras. And then, of course, I have that pair of German blue rams, which are still doing well and looking fantastic. And these are the low budget PetSmart ones. My good one, the expensive one from the Good Fish store, died suddenly, had those weird spots on its head, and then it just suddenly died. Again, these low budget ones are doing fine, and the low budget one that I got for my wife and I have in my wife's tank is also doing fine. So we'll have an update on my wife's tank here pretty soon too, coming up. Moving down to my quarantine tank, I just have the same 5 red wag platies in here that I put in here before I left in here when I cleaned the tank out. And why I still have the only 5 in here, I don't know. I mean, well, obviously I'm guessing it's because I have all males in there. But I find that interesting that I just happen to only leave 5 males in the tank, but I have not had any babies since I separated the other fish out of this tank, so I kind of have to assume I've got 5 males in this tank. So I don't know, that's kind of interesting. So moving along to my brackish tank, not much going on in here either. It's been a couple of weeks, but I added a power head in the back. I don't know if I updated that in the last Round the World update or not, but if you can see this small power head back here, that is just for the sake of redundancy. I made the mistake of leaving the filter turned off. For all intents and purposes, it wasn't functioning in this tank for quite a long time, and if I had some sort of secondary backup way of circulating the water, it would have prevented some illness and stuff in the tank. Now, that might have also prevented me from finding the problem when I did, but well, I don't know. I don't think it would have, because I found the problem when I went to do a water change, which I would have done anyway, and that's when I noticed the problem. So having that secondary source of water circulation in there is going to be good for just, I like having that secondary backup just in case anything goes wrong with my primary source of water circulation. Fish-wise, you know, same old, lots of little guppies swimming around. You can see Butterbean in the back swimming up and down. He's just doing his thing, ticking over like a clock. And that's about it. I haven't done anything to the tank in a while, but we are probably due for a water change here pretty soon. I did a feeding video not too long ago. If you're interested in watching Butterbean munch on some of his snails and crunch them up, it's almost an ASMR style video of just listening to the hum of the filter and the crunch of the snail shells as Butterbean does his little helicoptering around while he, you know, finds just the perfect angle to attack his snails and all that kind of stuff. Fun videos if you don't mind watching, you know, live animals being eaten before your very eyes, because that's what's happening when he's crunching up those snails. He really is eating live animals, but they're only snails, so I don't worry too much about it. Anyway, we are done. We are back where we started for the most part at my 29 miscellaneous, and if we didn't get enough of a look at that angelfish in the first go around, we can get a little bit of a look at it in the corner now. And as always, that angelfish is just getting more and more stunning every time we look at it. So thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed. Don't forget, I do a live stream every Friday and Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Look forward to seeing you then. Make sure you ring that bell, and that way you won't miss any spur of the moment live streams I may do or any of the updates I do. So thanks again. I'll see you real soon in the next one.